Thank you all for joining us for our discussion on global threats from Russia's war and the peace formula of President Zelenskyy. And I really appreciate having Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine with us, Mr. Mykola Tochytskyi. You have been here negotiating for the peace formula, looking ahead for the next steps, what could be there. So I think first we would ask from you to give us a brief overview and the hope for future. And then we have Professor Hausmann, who is the founder and director of Growth Lab at Harvard University. And I've asked Professor Hausmann to take a little bit more of a global view, because you have obviously more of a global picture than us here. We are all more or less Europeans, or at least transatlantic. We also have Professor Plochy, Professor of Ukrainian History, a director of Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard University as well. And I believe Serhii will be able to complement what Vice Minister has to say on where might history take us, what must we learn from the history to have a brighter future. And then we have one empty chair, which will hopefully be fulfilled by Professor Nouriel Roubini, who is the CEO of Roubini Macro Associates. And as we all know, he's a very non-linear economic thinker. And I guess we need a little bit of this thinking to try to predict also the Ukrainian economic future. So two economists, if you count me, three, one historian and one deputy minister who now has the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Does it work? Madam President, thank you very much, colleagues. It's a really pleasure just the next day after the fourth summit conference on national security and diplomatic advisor discussion on peace formula of President Zelenskyy to share with you some elements which I can allow to me to speak. It's very interesting to see that already 82 countries and institutions participated on this discussion. It seems to me that peace formula of President Zelenskyy became a roadmap for many countries which would like to live according to the UN Charter, international law, and rule of law. Of course, we had different opinions. It's not 82 countries which agreed in everything, but it was a very good discussion on next 5 elements of peace formula, from withdrawing Russian armed forces from Ukrainian territory, which must be the main element of further discussion with Russia about the peace, to the question how to end the war. Frankly, in reality, we are living today 692nd days of the war with Russia and provoked an open aggression on Ukraine. But in reality, we have here very famous historian, not only in this podium, but also I see some familiar people and faces in this room. In reality, the war of Russia is some kind of style of life. Doesn't matter how this empire was created and which name she had, from Moscovia to Russian Federation. Inside it was a Russian Empire and Soviet Union, but the manner or the tools which Russia keep or used to keep his last imperialistic European approach continue to be the same. And we as majority of us, as neighbors, we know this very well from our past. The problem of Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine seems to be the same and familiar for many of us. Our Baltic colleagues has the possibility to manage to obtain timely the security guarantees from NATO, but it's not allowed to them to be protected from the cyber attacks, which are massive. And of course, we consider that these aggression or this war can become not only regional but also in a world dimension if we will not stop Russia. Because we didn't stop them correctly in Georgia and in 2014, I think Russia will continue to weaponize the whole dimension of societies of the European or democratic countries. From ecological issue, which don't have any border, and you know that because of destroying Kakhovka Dam, we have had a huge, enormous ecological problem in the region, and not only in Ukraine, but also in the Black Sea. We still have a massive destruction of our infrastructure. We continue to have a huge problem with kidnapping of our children. We continue to have an irresponsible rhetoric of Russia on nuclear security. And because of Russian occupation of Zaporizhzhia, biggest nuclear plant in Europe, we do not exclude that Russia can even weaponize this nuclear plant. So the goal for many of those which have been united yesterday here in Davos to discuss the issue how return the world to the rule of law, how oblige Russia to, as a permanent member of Security Council, where she must be one of the dock of control of the rule of law, how to keep or rebuild or strengthen the existing Second World War post structure of peace. And in reality, I think each of the questions which Russia tried to weaponize during this war, we have addressed in a peace, discussed in a peace formula, which has 10 points. I'm very delighted to tell you that we are approaching the concrete result of the work of each of 10 groups. We hope that we can have in a few months summit of leaders, head of state and government on a peace formula. And after that, each of 10 points must be redressed and built on a basis of consensus of the members of the groups. As I already mentioned, we have had 82 countries and institutions, but it's not because we didn't have additional demand to join. It's because of, how to say, capacity to manage such a big quantity of the nation which would like to discuss the issue. As I said, we know how to do, what to do. Minimum in our case, we need to fight, and this is our Ukrainian obligation. But when we are talking about the peace formula, it's not about only the peace in Ukraine. It's about the peace in the world and the existence of the future world. And it depends on us, all of us, what kind of future we will have, or dark with using the weapon by some alliance of Russia, or we can build a concrete, solid peace, last and very responsible for very responsible nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Minister. And I truly believe that the fact that we have such a comprehensive plan allows the global world, the freedom-loving world, to really unite behind President Zelensky's peace plan and make sure that there is only one peace plan, which is President Zelensky's peace plan. But numbers actually fail me when I try to think about, how easy it should be to obtain our objectives, namely getting Russia out of Ukraine. Because if I look only at the Rammstein coalition, the defense expenditure of those countries is 1.27 trillion. And now, if you compare that to Russian, it's 0.09 trillion. Yet we are not winning this war. So economists cannot have an answer. Professor Plochy, you must have an answer. Why we are not winning?
Thank you. It's a very, very important question, especially today. I'll provide answer as a historian, not as an economist. And the reason is that basically it's a very different war that is being fought on the part of Russia and on the part of Ukraine's Western allies. If you look at the Russian propaganda and Russian actions as well, they're mobilized to fight not with Ukraine, they're mobilized to fight against the West. So in Russia, it is the war on the West rhetorically, but also in terms of mobilization of the resources. When you look at the West, the perspective is very different. West is not at war. West refuses to recognize that it's being challenged. The discussion is whether we should help Ukraine or not help Ukraine, and to what degree we should do that. And the voices, especially in the course of the last few months, are stronger and stronger that probably we shouldn't help too much and let's settle. That's the reality of the last few months. And given this very different framework in which war is perceived in Moscow, in Washington, in European capitals, the outcome is not very promising. Now, very broadly speaking, there are two types of peace. One of them is when one side wins and dictates the conditions. And this is what we hear from Moscow. The idea is not only the annexation of the Ukrainian territories, but also dictating what sort of Ukraine should it be, how much troops there should be, army, and so on and so forth. And this is the peace that, exactly as the deputy minister just said, it leads to war, but not to war only in Ukraine, but a global one. Look at what is happening today on the battlefields of Ukraine. There are Chechens who were actually defeated and taken over in the 1990s when the West and the world and Ukraine, including Ukraine, were silent. Now they're being mobilized as basically part of the Russian army. Look at the Donetsk and Luhansk, eastern Ukraine. They are in the ranks of the Russian army. If Ukraine loses, you can actually continue the line. You can see what will be happening. Russia will become much stronger and much more aggressive, not only vis-a-vis Ukraine, like it became vis-a-vis Chechnya or Eastern Ukraine, but vis-a-vis Central Europe and the West in general. So West has to change the framework. West has to change the perspective. This war for the West is not anymore for Ukraine and what will happen in Ukraine only. That stage has passed. The question that West has to answer is the future of the West itself. And until that will happen, I don't think that we will see the transformation of the enormous economic resources, human resources, intellectual resources of the West into the mechanisms that would allow to stop Russia and help to preserve, if it still exists, international order. And at least my understanding, broad understanding of President Zelensky's formula is that this is the formula of peace that should actually restore international order.
Thank you and welcome, Professor Rubini. You arrived just at the moment when I disqualified all economists from answering the question why we are not winning, because actually Rammstein coalition commands so many times more resources than Russia does. And then we turn to historians to try to explain to it. But I'll allow you to settle in a little bit longer, and I will turn now to Professor Hausmann. Professor Hausmann, how does it look to you, this peace plan? Because if I look, it starts off On a second element is food security, not an issue for Ukraine itself. You could argue that also radiation and nuclear safety and energy security and environmental protection are the issues which actually much wider than is, Ukraine's immediate needs. How does the rest of the world see this? Does they notice that this is the Ukrainian offer, which is far wider than just ending this kind of hot war on Ukrainian territory? Or what's the general opinion?
Well, I must say that I am puzzled and somewhat really upset at the lack of moral clarity in so much of the political leadership in the global south. I'm really upset with President, with obviously my own president in Venezuela, that is an ally of Russia because dictatorships, love each other. It doesn't matter if you think of yourself in the left or in the right. They have excellent technology for the secret police, for overcoming sanctions, for a bunch of nasty things. So I'm upset but not surprised that a country like Venezuela would always side with Russia, as do most dictatorships. But I'm really upset at a country like Brazil or a country like South Africa. I think the moral issues in this case are kind of like super obvious. The idea of assuring every country that it can live securely in its recognized borders is something that the smaller you are as a country, the more important it is to you, because if it's the law of whoever has the more power, then we cannot maintain this order, and we have to go back to a world of very few large empires because no country can protect itself. So I think that this is an issue where it's obviously in the interest of the global south to support the Zelenskyy plan. But there are, I must confess, with somewhat of a degree of surprise and disappointment, that there's too many in the global south that think that if the West supports something, they should be on the other side of that trade. And I think that's in the background, and I don't think it does the global south any good. So that with respect to that. With respect to what the plan means for the Ukraine, I'm going to do a little bit of a dilettante view of a Ukrainian history, which you're going to correct me, but my sense is that the Ukrainian tragedy comes from earlier. That at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union and Ukraine becoming an independent country, as with many other countries in the Baltic states, but also the Warsaw Pact countries, they had the choice to either remain on the Russian in the Russian orbit or integrate with Europe. And in 1990, the income per capita of Ukraine was higher than that of Poland, was much higher than that of Romania, was not that far from that of the Baltic states, right? And today, Poland has an income per capita which is 3 times or so pre-war Ukraine. Romania has income per capita so twice pre-war Ukraine. So the countries that moved west in their economic integration and economic strategy have done much better than the countries that remained in the Russian orbit, like Belarus and Ukraine under Kuchma and Yanukovych. And so then it was obvious for Ukrainian citizens that they wanted to look west, and they had the 2004 political events. And then the 2014 political events, which is this idea that we want to integrate with the West. Right? I think that we want to integrate. We see the opportunities, we see the possibilities. I mean, Ukraine was exporting air pumps to Russia before 2014. Romania was producing in their history of Romania, they never produced air pumps. They didn't know how to produce air pumps. But Romania was inside the European Union. So when 2014 came, Ukrainian exports of air pumps to Russia collapsed, but they could not redirect those exports to the West. And just Ukrainian air pump production collapsed. So in my mind, it's very important that whatever peace agreement there is, that Ukrainians get the freedom to decide which economic route to take. And if they are allowed, they will want to move west. They will want to integrate with the EU. It will have made much more sense to develop air pumps in Ukraine that knew how to do it than to do it from scratch in Romania. But Romania had the advantages of being in the EU and you didn't. So I think that whatever peace agreement is one that has to give the degrees of freedom, not only in the number of troops, etc., but in the conduct of economic policy, that you really should be EU members. And I must say, on an optimistic front, that I always think that countries are rich, not so much because of the natural resources they have, but because of what they know how to do. And I think that this war has been a learning experience for Ukraine. I mean, now you are producing drones in massive numbers. You will have developed your defense industry. But in the meantime, you have the most advanced e-government in the world, right? So I think that there's a lot of things that you have been figuring out how to do that can become, you've been solving your problems, but you're not the only one that has those problems. So those things become your export basket of the future. So it will not be just, the Ukrainian grain. It will also be the Ukrainian know-how that in some sense has been expanded by this horrible experience you've had to go through. Let me stop there.
Yep. Thank you. I have to say that if you compare those who were occupied by Russia, therefore strictly inside the Soviet Union, and who then escaped in 91, there you can compare Baltic states, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia. Those who turned quickly to West, it was not economic incentive, it was security incentive, by the way. I mean, economy matters, but those countries were ready to forego cooperation economically with Russia. Russia actually kicked us out of their economic hemisphere when they realized we have politically turned westwards. But the drive actually was not economy. The drive was safety and security, always. So I really also looking at this peace plan and for me it comes naturally, and I would turn now to Professor Rubini, that the driver behind the peace plan, the driver behind also the Ukrainian turn clearly economically towards West is security and safety. And even if the only positive news last year were economic news, Ukraine coming closer to the European Union rather than NATO, which is their dearest dream till this day. How do you see, as an economic thinker, I mean, is economy just a side effect and the driver security? But what should we do that these side effects will be felt very quickly, even before the war ends, by the Ukrainian citizens? Because this peace plan also carries economic promises, I feel.
Yeah, important questions. Well, as an economist, usually we make a distinction between how the world should be and how the world is likely to be, between normative statements about what's desirable and optimal, as opposed to what's more likely. And from an optimal, desirable, normative point of view, of course, it was a brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine, totally unacceptable. It's not just it's not just about Russia, Ukraine. There is a group of countries, revisionist powers, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Pakistan, We have challenged the economic, social, political, monetary, security, military order that the US, Europe, the West, their friends and allies have created after World War II. If you lose Ukraine, then China is going to say, if you cannot even defend a country within your own region, then of course I'm going to go and take over Taiwan, and all that's going to say. So it's well beyond the Ukraine thing, and that's why the support of US, Europe, and the West is key about how the world should be, and full solidarity to Ukrainian people who have suffered. By the way, you know, this war from the US point of view has been a bargain. You've spent $70 billion. There's not been a single American who has died. And you've eroded by 50% or more the military power of Ukraine. So those within the Congress who say we shouldn't give a penny more to Ukraine because we should give it to our own people don't understand stuff. Partly it's politics, partly it's populism, partly it's really, I don't know what it is. So in an ideal world, Russia will be fully defeated. Ukraine is going to take all its lands back, including Crimea, and that will be a lesson to all sorts of aggressive autocrats. The question is what's more likely to happen. And the constraint right now is, unfortunately, given the policy of the US, it's not even obvious that more economic and military aid is going to be provided to Ukraine. Hopefully, there'll be a compromise, but the amount are not going to be as large as before. If Trump is elected, even less so. Even Europeans are all sorts of constraints. The Hungary, the constraints of Germany, how much can it help, and so on. So hopefully there'll be money. But even if there was money, there's another bottleneck. Right now, there are not enough weapons around the world for all the conflicts that have to be fought. It's not just Russia, Ukraine. It's what's happening in the Middle East. US has to give it to Taiwan, has to rebuild its own forces in Guam and Okinawa. So literally, there is not enough munitions to give to everybody to fight and defend all the things you want to. So my point is the following one. Even in a ideal world in which Ukraine gets all the money, financial, monetary, military, as you want, like in the past, even in a world in which you get even all the weapons you want, and that's not going to be likely, the reality is that right now, the counteroffensive did not succeed with all the money and all the weapons because the Russians had the time to build up their own defenses. And they're a war economy where now X% of GDP is a war economy. So even if you were giving all this money and this weapon to Ukraine, if there's going to be a second counteroffensive next spring, it's going to unfortunately fail as much as it did the first time around because the Russians have the time to build up their own defenses. If anything, they could even regain more territory. That's the reality about the world, how it's likely to be. So unfortunately, the reality is one in which effectively a partition has occurred. Ukrainians shouldn't accept it. They should say we should do everything is possible to regain every inch of our own territory. But if you think about it, if you're going to do another counteroffensive, more destruction of your civil and other infrastructure, more killing of your own people, more damage to your own economy, and you're not going to make advances. 18% of your country is unfortunately under the control of Russia until there be changes in Russia. So an alternative, my view, is to accept that de facto, if you cannot change the things militarily, you don't give up on your aims in the long run, but you invest on the reconstruction of your own country. And the good news right now is that the Europeans have started a process going to lead to negotiation to eventually EU membership. There'll be lots of money coming also from the US. The money has been seized from the Russian, maybe over time the 300 billion used for the reconstruction of Ukraine. The US and the West and NATO is going to give security guarantees to Ukraine, is going to give them enough weapons to defend themselves, with an option that down the line you're going to become member of NATO. So you keep 82% of your country, you're able to rebuild, you get a ceasefire. It's hard to sell it to your own people, but you have to sell it as that's the best option without giving up that you're going to eventually regain when Russia collapses the rest of your country. And maybe Putin is the obstacle to do this de facto, if not de jure, ceasefire. But I think at that point, the global South and China is going to tell him these conflicts cause so much damage to the global South in terms of food prices, energy, and so on, that you have to accept a deal like this. And then you can start rebuilding your country. And you rebuild your country, become part of Europe, you eventually become part of NATO. And eventually, Russia is a declining country, economically, socially, politically. Something is going to implode. It might take 5 years, it might take 10 years. And maybe you can regain the rest of your land somewhere down the line. To me, that's the best you can achieve realistically right now. As I said, the first best, the optimal, desirable is not likely. We all like it to be the case. So we have to think about what's likely to happen, and therefore what you do. You keep on fighting and lose people, lose infrastructure. You start thinking about the de facto ceasefire that leads them to rebuilding your country, and there'll be lots of support. There'll be debt restriction, there'll be lots of stuff that leads them to investment coming into country, rebuilding. That investment is not going to come if there is war. Nobody's going to invest into the private sector if there is this situation. So you have to stop it, and then start rebuilding. It might not be unpopular to say, this thing. People don't want to talk about it. People have been saying in the West, we're going to support the Ukraine and their goals under any condition until they get what they want. They decide what they want. But let's start to be a little bit realistic about what is likely to happen. That's my 2 cents of wisdom.
Can we really say that Ukraine had the money and all the support it needed if the Rammstein coalition nations on a yearly basis have spent 0.1% of their GDP in helping Ukraine to defend themselves against Russia? Is it really all we can do? That's my question before we could start discussing whether this is all we could achieve. And if you say yes to that question, then what do you think, and maybe that's already for you also to think, Minister, what do you think Putin will think if he has the feeling that he was fighting NATO in Ukraine, which he is telling himself and his people daily, we are fighting NATO in Ukraine, and that he at least didn't lose? What might he think then up next? I mean, if you could a little bit elaborate on the first part of this question, this out of the 47 trillion of a GDP of Rammstein nation, the spending only is 0.2 over 2 years of our GDPs, and it's half and half, roughly, America and Europe. Is it really all?
Already what has been given to Ukraine has led now to a backlash, because the average American says, I don't care about the rest of the world, I'm suffering, and why they're not spending my money on me as opposed to Ukraine. It's a very narrow-minded, stupid view of things, but many people feel this way. My point is the following. US has been generous, 70 billion plus. Europe has been generous. More could have been given, yes, but they've given lots of money, they've given lots of military help. And in spite of all these things, because the Russians have created a war economy, this counteroffensive has not succeeded. And I'm saying even the best scenario in which the same amount of money and the same amount of munition is going to come, unlikely, because you don't even have the munition if you get the money, so you cannot fight it. You're not going to be able to be successful and completely defeat Russia. The best you can do is to hold on the current lines, plus or minus epsilon of territory. That's the reality, frankly. So a world in which you can say Ukraine should be given 10 times as much and 10 times more weapons is a world that doesn't exist. You have to think about the world that exists. And in that world, unfortunately, for now, there is partition. And later you can rebuild, and then eventually Russia is going to implode, and you can regain your country. That's my sense.
Professor Hausmann wants to react to that.
No, I wanted to ask Nouriel if I can understand the argument that you are making on this side, but in that scenario, I don't understand why Putin would accept it, because Putin thinks that why stop here? I mean, they are not going to put the money, they are not going to put the ammunition. Let me continue.
No, my point, we're going to give them enough money to Ukrainians and munition so that they can defend themselves, so that Russian cannot gain additional territory. I think that's going to happen, and give them also the security guarantees and other things, that you stay at the current level of division of land and partition. You need to do enough so that they cannot regain more territory, and that's going to happen. I think in spite of the policy of the US, in spite of the policy of Europe, that's going to happen. Doing much more than that, I think, is mission impossible, even if you had all the money and the munitions. That's my point. But
yes, I'm afraid that they will gang now all up on you, and I have to come in and rescue somehow you. But one question, yes, please.
That's, by the way, people don't say it in public, but if you go to Washington or Brussels, that's what people think, unfortunately.
Yes, your scenario is based on realistic assumptions.
Yeah.
Question, do you think Putin would agree to formal ceasefire and not to continue bombard Ukraine, and basically to dismantle all of your wonderful plan? He will continue.
You're right. Probably for now, no. And he may hope that maybe if he keeps on bombarding for another year, Trump comes to power and may have a total different view of what needs to be done with Ukraine, and maybe he's going to give up altogether on Ukraine. That's why he wants to wait it out. I think that, as I pointed out, the only ones who can push Putin to accept the de facto, if not de jure, armistice or ceasefire is going to be the Chinese and the global South, because if Ukraine were to say, okay, we're willing to accept for the time being a ceasefire, if he goes ahead, then he's going to have literally the entire world against him. And as you know, China and even the global South is quite sympathetic, in spite of sitting on the fence, to many of the issues that Ukraine has addressed, and so on. And certainly the global South will be sympathetic to say something that the ceasefire is good for the world and just for the region. So I think the Chinese are going to tell Putin enough is enough at that point.
Vice Minister, you've certainly heard that even though President Zelenskyy, when asked about it last week in Tallinn, denied there is a pressure on Ukraine to go prematurely and discuss ceasefire with Russia. And also you must be, hedging the risks which relate to the US elections, and your hedging must start from the point of view that actually Trump's record in Northeast Europe is not so bad, thinking back to his first mandate. Of course, the problem might be unpredictable what he does, but his track record's not so bad, frankly, in that corner. Thinking of the troops brought to Poland, close cooperation with Baltic states on the defense, and also the demand of 2% of spending on defense in Europe. So what's your reaction to what we've heard?
Let me start by saying that Russia not fighting NATO in Ukraine. As somebody who has some kind of obligation to talk with Russian first day of the war, exactly 27th of February, I can tell you the first message and the last one, without any, discussion on NATO, was that you as a nation, as a country, do not exist. You don't have any right to exist. So this is first. For your understanding, this is a war or fight for Ukraine existential. Because Russia, prepared his own history of Ukraine, and they believe on that. Second, of course, you can have some kind of risk of election in any countries, but it's internal issue each of country. We will not stop in any case to fight, because I already mentioned to you, we are not a country which can allow to us for the moment to lose this possibility to finish this war and to finish this imperialistic approach of Russia during the century which we survived. Second, of course, we can speak about the money which spent West on Ukraine, but if we will stop or we will have a ceasefire, it will be exactly what Putin wants. Maybe not today, but in reality it will be some kind of example to his alliance, that you can challenge the international order. You can start by aggression to take the land, to destroy the territorial integrity of the country, and continue with some kind of, fatigue of this war, and you can stop on this, that, after that recovered and restart again. We, of course, assume the situation that the world for the moment don't have enough armament just to fight such a big country as Russia. That's why we started ourselves, and thanks to our Estonian colleagues, to assume the situation and to build or rebuild, or even, enlarge our own capability. I am talking about the defense industry. Already 4 different forums organized with a different, well-prepared countries on defense industry, and we have had already a deep discussion of our future armed forces, what we need, what kind of armaments will be necessary for Ukraine, not only to win this war, but to control the eastern flank of NATO. And, in the middle time to prepare better to be a member as soon as possible. In any case, as you already absolutely rightly pointed, we don't see any possibility for any discussion with Putin regime. If Russia, I mean the nation, people, difficult of course to imagine that it will be, would like to have his own future, they need to do something with this president and decide where they will be. If not, it will be the job for Ukrainian and his alliance to finish this war. Sorry to be a little bit brutal, but we don't have any other possibility. If not, they will just destroy Ukraine and Ukrainian economy, the children and everything. And after that, he will go, I don't exclude even, sorry to say, Madam President, even to the Baltic states. For him, it's,
I would, thank you, Minister, Vice Minister. I would now turn to Professor Blochy. I mean, in 91, we were told we have to be realistic. Nobody's going to prosecute Soviet crimes as Nazi crimes were prosecuted. In 2008, we were told to be realistic. Stopping Russian troops 40 kilometers from Tbilisi is enough. And therefore, we will have peace and all will be over tomorrow. After 2014, we were told to be realistic. Crimea was only given by Khrushchev to Ukrainians and nothing will change. And now we're being told to be realistic when 18% of Ukrainian territory is gone. And indeed, I'm not, of course, blaming Professor Rubini on that. You are, in a way, bringing the message which we Europeans are indeed getting from America quite strongly. On the other hand, we have, for example, President Macron, who has lately reasserted the Ukrainian right to, also fight on Russian territory, hitting the military targets on Russian territory, and who has this summer on Globsec publicly apologized for French position of asking Baltic states to shut up of those issues, even if those issues which we didn't shut up were not related to Russia but Iraq, but he made a clear connection. So is America and Europe really going in really different ways? And is this then our last ray of hope, of not allowing free world to be beaten in Ukraine, consequently free world to be beaten in Latin America, free world to be beaten in close to China, all these issues. How do you feel about it?
We have really major disconnection in terms of the historical experience with Russia and with the Soviet Union when it comes to Eastern Europe, and the experience in the United States of America. Poles, Bolts, everyone were considered to be crazy in the 1990s, knocking on the doors of NATO. Why they were doing that? Well, it turned out that they actually knew what they were doing. And the ideas about ceasefire today and now and on whatever terms doesn't include not only the early history of World War II, after World War II, but the early history of this war that started in the year 2014. And there were two peace talks and ceasefires and peace agreements, Minsk I and Minsk II. Do you know what happened to Minsk I? Actually, it was violated by Russia, and they took over the Baltsovo and they started war, pushing the Ukrainian troops away from Donetsk. Do you know what happened with Minsk II? Exactly the same story as with Minsk I. Russia withdraws and starts the war. So basically, what the West is, or part of the West suggests, it's actually Minsk III, refusing to learn the lessons, either from 1991 or 1990, but also from the year 2014 and 2015. And that's very, very important. Again, I'm putting emphasis not so much on economics, because there are a lot of expertise here on this panel on economics, but more talking about the perspectives and historical experience. It is different, and that's an issue, that's a problem, and I guess it's our task also to educate our allies about the realities, including historical realities of of this part of the world, of this region.
Some of us even remember the Budapest Agreement, and no, it was not the agreement with Prime Minister Orban and the European Union to allow Ukraine to come closer to Europe. It was another agreement. So we have questions from auditorium, and I would, yes, please, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Halina Yanchenko. I'm a member of Parliament of Ukraine, actively involved in parliamentary diplomacy. Dr. Rubini, I have a question to you. Well, you said a couple of things that sort of resonated here, but maybe in a slightly wrong way. Well, first you said that counteroffensive was not successful, despite the fact that Ukraine have got all the weapon we've got. The thing is that we didn't got the weapon we needed. You know very well, I'm pretty sure that you are educated about the article of General Zaluzhny, who calculated exactly the amount of tanks, 300, artillery, 500, and then armored vehicle, up to 700 that we needed to get back to the basically the borders before the February 23. We didn't get that weapon. We didn't get the long-range missiles that we needed before the counter-offensive operation have started. We didn't receive F-16. So in my humble opinion, and I believe many of Ukrainians who are here can also agree, we did not receive the weapon to make the counteroffensive successful. And therefore, it is really weird to hear some Western leaders and some Western intellectuals blame Ukraine that despite the weapon we received, we did not make a successful counteroffensive. And now the question. You said that the circumstances around Ukraine and war basically pushes Ukraine and the whole world to start negotiations. So my question is, what in your opinion have changed in Putin's mind to make these negotiations successful? Because once again, couple historical facts. First, President Zelenskyy have won presidential election as a candidate who was promoting peace. He said that he will do everything. He will, I don't know, put himself on his knees before Putin to actually finish the war. And he did a lot of negotiations after he won elections. But Putin, in 2022, he started full-scale invasion, despite all the efforts provided by and committed by Zelenskyy. Second, we as Ukrainian power authorities were very looking forward for negotiations even after full-scale invasion. We have sent our negotiation mission to Minsk, the country which was basically used to invade in Ukraine. Do you know what happened with negotiation team? They were poisoned. Third, Russia has broke each and every negotiation agreement we reached in Belarus after full-scale invasion and later in Turkey. So we agreed a lot about, for example, green corridors to evacuate civilians from the occupation. Do you know what Russian troops were doing to this? Basically civilians who were moving on civilian cars with signed children on the front windows. They were shooting these people, shooting children, shooting women. So, once again, my question to you, Dr. Rubini, is what, in your opinion, have changed in Putin's mind to make this negotiation that you are promoting successful and finish the war? Thank you.
Thank you. This is a very tough question, and I will give Professor Rubini a minute to think about it, and I will turn to the most neutral. I'll turn to the most neutral on our panel, who is a little bit outside of our kind of groupthink, and I will ask Professor Hausmann, what could we do to re-engage US and to reinforce US belief that indeed we can win? All the, as we know, number crunching is in our favor. All the values are in our favor, yet we are somehow losing US.
Well, I mean, the truth is that there is a broad majority of Democrats and Republicans that agree with you. And the thing is that they're fighting over other things, and they're keeping this issue hostage to these other things that they also want, because there's internal infighting. So
rekindling the sense of urgency.
I think that the sense of urgency is important. I think also that it's not just the US, right? that the fear that Trump might win the next election should make Europe realize that they need more political union, that they need more security spending, that they need more investment in Ukraine, because they cannot piggyback on the US. So I am still optimistic that you see, what the Republicans want is not less spending in Ukraine. What they want is less immigration into the U.S. They're negotiating things in a complete. You are a pawn in another game, right? But I think that in the end, I hope that the urgency will be there and there will be a package, but that the fear that Trump might return actually might create more urgency in Europe.
This is true. This is the only positive about it, that we really see Europe gathering around the thinking of strategic autonomy, which used to be the root word. Now it isn't.
Yeah.
But Professor Rubini, you had that tough question, your chance to try to explain.
Well, I'll make the following observations. First of all, even if there was a ceasefire along the current lines, Putin has lost this war. He went there and literally was delusional. He thought in 2 weeks he'll be in Kiev, take over the entire Ukraine and put a puppet government and control it, and then control all the other near abroad and so on. He has miserably failed, okay? Before this war, maybe they'd taken over 14% of Ukraine, now it's maybe 18%, but that goal has been lost. You have Ukraine united is never going to be part of Russia, it's going to be part of Europe, it's going to be part of NATO, and the economic cost on Russia has been a disaster. Potential growth in Russia before this war was barely 1.5%. It was pathetic for a country, it's a middle-income country. It should be 4 or 5%. It was a disaster. You have aging of population and so on. After this war, potential growth of Russia with all the sanctions, they're going to be forever on them, is closer to zero. You have a brain drain with the smartest people in Russia escaping. You have a war economy. You have inflation. You have sanctions that are going to not even allow Russia to produce as much oil as they did in the past. Their entire manufacturing base is going to be damaged by these sanctions. So they've already lost the military war, the economic war, the financial war, even if the sanctions have not been yet effective in changing the regime. So they've lost, period. And I think that eventually that's going to lead even to a collapse of regime, and maybe a new regime is more willing to discuss how to negotiate giving back to Ukraine the land they need. That's a reality. So people say they've won if we give up and we have the current ceasefire at the current level. It's not true. They've totally lost across the board. You have a more united NATO, more united Europe, more expanded NATO. It's been a disaster. Half of its military has died or has collapsed. It's been a total utter failure for Russia. And if he was not a dictator, he'll be kicked out of power, and eventually he will be kicked out of power. That's a reality. Then, you know, and I'm believing actually optimistically, the US Republican Democrats are going to give a compromise on the money and on the military aid. Europe is going to do its share. But my view, and maybe I'm wrong, that even if you give all the money, and even if you give all the weapons, and they're not enough, because Israel needs the weapon, Ukraine needs the weapon, Taiwan needs the weapon, US needs the weapon, China, Japan needs the weapon. There are not enough of them. There's a bottleneck of capacity of providing weapons to all the important places in the world. And maybe Ukraine is first and foremost, but there are other security threats you deal with. Unfortunately, the reality on the ground is actually that this year, realistically, even if you give them more weapons, chances are the Russians can make advances more than the Ukrainians. So if you freeze it at the current level, you're lucky, because things are going to go actually in the wrong way, even with the weapons. So that's my view. It's not ideal, but Russia has failed. It's a failed state. Actually, the risk is that Russia collapses. It's going to split in a bunch of countries separate with nuclear weapons. It's going to be even more dangerous if Putin collapses in a disorderly way. And that will be even more dangerous for Ukraine and the West. So we have to be realistic about what's possible. And in an ideal world, step by step, we're going to go towards what's ideal. But it's not going to happen this year, unfortunately.
We have time for one more question. Then I will give the final word to Vice Minister here. And then I will allow the discussion to step away from the podium. But you have to promise nobody comes to blows in this auditorium. Then the last question goes to you, please.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Vasil Kushmans. I represent Brussels-based NGO Promote Ukraine. And I have the question for the Vice Vice Minister Mykola Tochytskyi. The question in context of the peace formula of President Zelenskyy, one of the article is justice, and from the perspective from Brussels, we know that in Belgium they hold 190 billion frozen Russian assets, and as I know, they even don't want to give it to us. In the reason how they explain that this money in Euroclear, Belgium is a majority, it's general holder of shares of Euroclear, and they don't want to create the precedent of hand over these frozen assets to Ukraine, because all another investor like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or Latin America will go out from the Euroclear, and this can bring the collapse to Belgian system, economical system. What we will do in these questions, and when we talk about the global threat from Russia, also again back to Belgium, Russia have huge influence in the Belgium. They provide the business with metal, Rusal, Lukoil, Fluxys, LNG, diamonds. A lot of the trade in 2022 with Belgium, Russia increased on 195%, which mean twice more than in China in the same period, Russia and China in the same period. Maybe, how you think, maybe we should to power it, the diplomatic force in this strategical country, and finally to bring the ambassador to Ukrainian embassy in Belgium. Thank you.
Yeah, you still have ambassador there with me because I keep my credential. But in any case, sorry, I'm trying to joke. First of all, I don't think that Belgium are not a responsible partner. Even, you know, if you are looking on a F-16 coalition, Belgium not provided only the financial support, but also some kind of infrastructure for some training, reparation, etc. Speaking about point number 7, restoration of justice. This is exactly what we are trying to do in each of our group and on NSA Diplomatic Advisors Forum, where we work on a frame, legalistic frame, how to return the money, Russian frozen money, to Ukraine. And don't think only about one country. I mean, Belgium. I understand that you are in Belgium, but in reality, it's a problem for majority of democracy that you need to do everything legally. We base our fight on the basis of Article 51. We continue to respect the arms control agreement which we signed and ratified. That's why, colleagues, we have a leadership of neighbor, actually, of Belgium, Netherlands, for the point number 7. We have a team which work on a legal frame to resolve the problem which you already described, and I hope the colleagues one day will propose the concrete mechanism on which everybody will agree. And this is the main goal of the peace formula and the working group. And let me finish just by one element to reply to Mr. Robin. Russia withdrew from Kyiv because we fight it. This wasn't some kind of, good decision of Mr. Putin or goodwill which he describes it. He withdrew it because they lose it people, they lose it ammunition, they lose it the supply systems to the armed forces. And this was done because we fight it again. Second, you already mentioned that they lost a lot of scene, armament, army, etc. But the exactly ceasefire will allow to them to rebuild again because they have enough, human human possibility and to train, to prepare, and to send the new soldier to the war with Ukraine. And to finish just with, U.S., role. We are on a deep consultation with G7 countries and another 30 countries about the security guarantees. US are very active, and they are talking about not only reconstruction of Ukraine, how to supply ammunition, armaments, etc., but also how to build Ukraine stronger on his own industry capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'm sure our whole panel shares your pain, and I would really like to thank Professor Blochi for putting this into historic perspective, this peace plan for us. And Professor Hausmann, you were the one here who reminded our shared values and why all the smaller and middle-sized nations globally should actually support the peace plan, which they also seem to be doing in big numbers. And Professor Rubini, thank you for bravely bringing this message, because you are known as an economist always also to flag the negative risks which we have seen in our economy. Sometimes they materialize and sometimes they don't. And for the sake of all our Ukrainian friends, all of our free world nations, I really hope that the negative trends which you are pointing out have been pointed out for us to fight back and win against. So thank you, and I will now have to end this panel. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Madam President.